Hello, my name is Potylitsyna Olga. I'm a master student of Kostanay Regional University. I'm very glad to start our lecture. The topic of the lecture is Theoretical Basics of Neurolinguistics. Here is the plan of our lecture. Firstly, we'll introduce the notion neurolinguistics. Then we are going to review the historical development of neurolinguistics. And finally, we'll look at the neurolinguistics and its connection with the other sciences. Let's start with the first point of our lecture, the definition of neurolinguistics. Here we are going to answer the question, what is neurolinguistics? But before, I want to ask you a question. How does our brain work? Do you know? Our brains store information in networks of our brain cells. These neuronal networks are connected to the parts of our brain that control our movement and our internal and external sensations. The connection within these networks may be strong or weak, and the information that the cell sends out may increase the activity of some of its neighbors and inhibit the activity of others. Each time a connection is used, it gets stronger. Learning information or a skill happens by establishing new connections or changing the strength of existing connections. Neurolinguistics is a scientific discipline that studies the internal brain processes that underlie human speech activity. Neurolinguistics as a scientific discipline has arisen in the mainstream of natural linguistics and the intersection of neurology, psychology, and linguistics, and it studies the language system in relation to the brain substrate of linguistic behavior. An area of interest for neurolinguistics is the study of recognition mechanisms for speech stimuli, such as single words or sentences. Additionally, this discipline investigates the processes of generating oral or written speech, mastering or using a native language. Neurolinguistics is widely used in theoretical medicine as it allows establishing the effect of various changes in the brain activity. Linguistics is the study of how language is represented in the brain. That's how and where our brains store our knowledge of the language that we speak, understand, or read, or write. What happens in our brain as we acquire the knowledge, and what happens as we use our language in our everyday lives. The definition suggested by Collins English Dictionary defines neurolinguistics as the branch of linguistics that deals with the encoding of the language faculty in the brain. Baum and Sheila Blumstein declared that neurolinguistics is dedicated to understand and explicate the neurological basis of language and speech, and to characterize the mechanism and processes involved in language use. Elizabeth Elson claims neurolinguistics studies the relation of language and communication to different aspects of brain function. To sum up, neurolinguistics investigates how human brain understands and how human brain produces language and communication. So we have covered the first question, and it's time to talk about the historical development of neurolinguistics. The beginning of neurolinguistics is attributed to two fundamental discoveries of neuropsychology: localization of mental functions in the cerebral cortex and functional asymmetry of the human brain. The idea that the brain is not functioning homogeneous organ was expressed at the end of the 18th century. Frank Joseph Gall suggested the idea that different mental abilities of the person are clearly localized in different areas of the brain. In his opinion, localization is affected not only by sensory and motor functions, but also personality traits. Frank Joseph Gall was the first scientist who expressed the idea that speech function is localized in the frontal lobes of the brain. Gall explained that the cortex was the highest level of organization of the brain and that the cortex and other areas of the gray matter are connected by fibers of the white gray matter. In 1836, Marc Dex made a scientific report at the meeting of the Medical Society in France. The report was made on the basis of a survey of 40 patients who lost their speech as a result of brain damage. Deck suggested that there was a connection between speech loss and the damaged side of the brain, which allowed him to express the idea of the localization of each speech functions in the left hemisphere. Traditional neurolinguistics is said to have been born in 1861, when Paul Broca presented his theory based on the symptoms and the dissections of the brain. This period is called the classical stage of the neurolinguistic approach. Broca presented two important hypotheses. The first, that it was possible to localize psychological functions in the brain convolutions. The second, that linguistic symptoms were caused by lesions in the left hemisphere, and that the consequently language was localized, which was totally unexpected. For over 100 years, research in neurolinguistics depended on the study of language comprehension and production by people with aphasia. Domainer was a scientist who became very influential because of his associationism theory. Many have claimed that consciousness, intelligence, and memory were cortical but not localized. Inductive thinking was the result of associations between perception and deductive thinking, was simply an external result of induction. He found that the human cortex was the most developed around the Sylvian fissure. He therefore believed that this area related to the language function. In 1874, Wernicke Kalt, a German scientist, presented a theory based on the Broca's findings and on the brain's dissection of the patients with the problems of understanding the language. Wernicke discovered that the damaged zone of the first temporal gyrus affected the understanding of oral speech, that the patient couldn't understand the speech addressed to him, although the ability of oral speech itself hadn't lost. Thus, the center that is responsible for understanding speech was opened. It was called the Wernicke area. Wernicke's theory was a more elaborate model of the relationship between linguistic functions and the brain structures than had ever existed before. Broca's area is said to have motor representation of speech, while Wernicke's theory is said to have an auditory sound representation. Around the same time, linguists also turned to the field of speech pathology. Famous linguist Benoît de Courtenay was one of the first who showed the interest in this issue. In his work on pathology and embryology of the language, he devoted the observation of a particular patient. He distinguished two sides of the language, mental and physiological, and explored motor aphasia and disorder of the physiological processes in the speech. But de Courtenay, in his works, pay attention to the fact that language is a complex combination of physical, psychological, mental, and social and individual, thereby preparing the ground for a modern look of the language phenomenon. The ideas of neurolinguistics are developed in the works of our linguists. The American linguist Bloomfield, in his work Language, gave general characteristics of language form and standpoint of behaviorism, considering behavior rather than consciousness as the main subject of psychology. He defined language as a special form of behavior. A similar position was held by the Polish linguist Doroszewski, who considered a person as be a psychosocial creature. He expressed the functioning of linguistic mechanism in generalized form using the stimulus-reaction formula. The study of aphasia was seriously undertaken by the famous linguist Jacobson. In his works, he drew attention to the fact that in aphasia, certain general principles of construction and breakdown of the linguistic structure should be manifested. Jacobson also investigated the structural similarities between genetic code and natural language. The problems of neurolinguistics were dealt with Alexander Romanovich Luria. Luria at foundation of this science, based on the psychological views of Pavlov, the theory of functional system by Anokhin, and the psychological concepts of Vygotsky, Luria created a new classification of aphasia, proved the existence of various forms of period memory, thinking, and perception. Luria revealed the general principles of brain organization of higher mental functions of a person. His point is that the interpretation of speech messages is carried out by a complex of functional system of cerebral cortex zones. In view of the above, the subject of neurolinguistic research is not only a variety of phonological, grammatical, lexical, and semantic disorders of the linguistic mechanisms caused by the local brain damage. The issues of normal human linguistic behavior are increasingly occupied with neurolinguistics. In which parts of the brain speech functions are formulated and the linguistic mechanism is laid? What is the specialization of various areas of the brain in linguistic behavior? How does a person reflect reality using sensory organs and related language-brain analysis? Additionally, modern neurolinguistics is aimed to investigate the structures of consciousness, or degrees of freedom, possibility of adequate reflection by forms of human consciousness, natural language structure. Neurolinguistics has accumulated a huge amount of observations, experimental data, many of which are still awaiting interpretation and generalizations. The state of the neurolinguistics at this moment is such that there is no need to speak about the unity in understanding the brain nature of the communicative competence. In solving this, the central and peripheral problems of neurolinguistics, one can find not just disagreements, but diametrical approaches and mutually exclusive interpretations. Is neurolinguistics connected with other sciences? Of course. Many disciplines dealing with neurolinguistics provide inspiration and energy to this field. Neurolinguistics is closely connected with the field of psycholinguistics, which is aimed at to investigate the cognitive mechanism of language by employing the traditional techniques of experimental psychology. Psycho and neurolinguistic theories often intersect, and researchers in both fields of science are actively collaborating with each other. Many studies in neurolinguistics are connected using theories put forward by linguists and psycholinguists. These theories are being examined and further developed. In general, linguists develop theories regarding the structure of the language and the organization of the language information. Psycholinguists offer models for processing language information in the brain, and neurolinguistics analyze brain activity to find out how biological structures implement these psycholinguistics models. Neurolinguistics is characterized by connection with linguistics. It's impossible to study the mechanism of speech activity and their damage without relying on the language material itself. The units, constructions, and models of the language and their psychological correlates. Neurology. This is a science that studies the structure and functions of nervous system in the normal pathology. Logopedics. This is a branch of pedagogy. It investigates the manifestations, nature, and mechanism of evaluation of language system. It develops a scientific basis for overcoming and preventing them by means of special training and education. Biophysics and biochemistry examine the speech signal and the parts of the nervous system that are responsible for its movement. Cybernetics, it allows seeing in the passage of nerve impulses responsible for speech, the activity of the brain during the speech and thinking. Summing up, it's necessary to say neurolinguistics deals with many disciplines. This fact influences the existence of many kinds of data. theories, and models for research. So, we covered all the questions today. Thank you for your attention.